My ex refused a DNA test and painted me as a deadbeat dad, but I fought back. And revealed the truth that destroyed her lies. This story starts around 15 years ago when I was finishing up a contract job across the state. My girlfriend of 3 years, Melissa, had been acting strange even before I left. I'd been away for a few weeks, not long by any stretch, but just enough time to feel like I needed some space to think about things. Our relationship was going downhill fast, and I'd pretty much decided to break up with her as soon as I got back. I figured it'd be easier in person, you know. The day after I got back, she's already blowing up my phone, saying she has big news and that we need to talk. So, I head over, knowing something's up. Melissa's acting a little too excited, like over the top cheerful, and immediately I'm getting this gut feeling something's off. Then she drops it, she's pregnant. I'm not going to lie, that hit me like a ton of bricks. I just sort of stared at her, and the whole thing felt unreal for a second. But here's the kicker. After I let the news sink in, I asked how far along she was, expecting maybe a couple of weeks, tops. But then she says 4 to 7 weeks. Right away, I'm doing the math in my head. I've been gone for 5, maybe 6 weeks, depending on how you count the days. No matter which way I sliced it, those numbers didn't line up. I kept my cool, though, and asked if she was sure about the timing. I thought maybe she'd backpedal a bit, like she'd just gotten it wrong or something. But nope, she's sitting there nodding, absolutely certain. I told her, Melissa, I've been away for almost 6 weeks. That doesn't add up. She got all defensive right away, like I'd accused her of something huge. Are you doubting me? She fired back, saying, this is our baby. In that moment, I realized she was dead set on making me accept this. No questions, no pushback, nothing. But there was no way I was just going to roll over and go along with it. So, as calmly as I could, I told her that if she wanted me to be involved, we'd need 2 things. First, a paternity test to make sure the baby was mine. Second, if the test showed I was the father, then we'd go through lawyers to figure out support and custody. I wasn't trying to be a jerk here, but I wasn't about to let her rope me into something if it wasn't even my kid. Well, that set her off. She went from defensive to downright furious. She was yelling that I was insulting her, that I didn't trust her, and she kept saying things like, I can't believe you'd ask me to do something like that. According to her, just asking for a paternity test was basically calling her a liar to her face. But I was done playing along. So, I told her that if she wasn't willing to do the test, then we were over. And here's the weird part, she wouldn't accept the breakup. Like, she outright said, I don't accept that, as if she could just refuse to be broken up with. I don't even know how that works, but she was set on ignoring everything I just said and carried on like we were still together. When I finally left her place, I hoped maybe she'd cool off and realize I was serious about the breakup. But that was just the beginning of a long nightmare. The next couple of weeks were like a bad movie. Melissa started spreading the story that I was a deadbeat who had abandoned her while she was pregnant. She told all our friends, our old coworkers, even people I barely talked to anymore. Suddenly, I was getting calls from mutual friends saying things like, man, you really should step up. She's pregnant, and she needs you. Every time I tried explaining my side, it was like talking to a wall. Melissa had them convinced she was this poor, abandoned girl who'd been left to fend for herself. Some of my friends even offered to help her financially, and I knew a few people were slipping her money. It was like she'd made me into some kind of villain, and nobody wanted to listen to my side of things. She'd post on social media with all these woe is me updates, dropping hints about how hard life was, and people ate it up. I tried reaching out to people to explain my side, but it felt pointless. Even my family was getting pulled into it, and I ended up having to talk to a lawyer just to cover myself. I offered to help her out financially a bit, just to keep things from getting even more complicated, if on the off chance the kid really was mine. But my lawyer warned me not to give her anything, or it might be taken as me admitting I was the father. Basically, if I sent her a dime, it could bite me down the road. It felt like a lose-lose situation. Meanwhile, Melissa had no shortage of people willing to listen to her. There was this one guy, Tony, who kept bugging me to do the right thing and support her. He had this idea that helping her wouldn't come back to bite me legally. I finally told him, look, if you feel so strongly, why don't you support her? He backed off after that, but it left a bad taste in my mouth that people I thought were friends were more willing to believe her than me. The worst part was the random encounters. I'd be at the grocery store or out with friends, and people would give me this look, like they knew all about my situation and were just waiting to judge. No matter what I said, it didn't change anything. They just saw her as this poor, pregnant woman who'd been done wrong, and I was the guy who ran off. I'd try to explain, saying there was no proof I was the father, but that only made people look at me like I was in denial. And then, right in the middle of all this, Melissa started sending me photos, just random, staged pictures of her and the baby. She'd put these captions like, "Lucy wants to know where daddy is," and they were clearly meant to make me feel guilty. I just deleted them and tried to ignore it, hoping she'd give up. But I was starting to realize this wasn't going to be that simple. Honestly, looking back, I can see how naive I was. I thought if I just ignored her, she'd eventually move on. But Melissa wasn't about to let me go that easily. Every time I turned around, she was there, telling more people, spreading her story, and trying to pull me back in. That was just the start, though. Little did I know, things were about to get a lot more complicated. So, after that whole mess of me trying to cut things off, Melissa just wouldn't let up. It's like she made it her personal mission to keep me tangled in her web. And every couple of months, she'd find a new way to drag me back in. It started small, just a few text messages here and there. She'd send me random updates like, "Lucy is doing great. She smiled for the first time today." I'd ignore it. Then, a week or so later, I'd get another, "Lucy misses you," or "It's too bad you're missing out on these special moments." I tried telling myself she'd get bored eventually, but nope. Melissa would find these ways to remind me she existed, that she had this baby she was convinced was mine, and that I was missing out. Then she started escalating. I'd be out with friends, and she'd just show up out of nowhere with a baby, acting like we were still together or something. She'd waltz over, holding Lucy, smiling like she wasn't the least bit out of place. "Oh, hey," she'd say, like it was casual, "thought you'd want to see your daughter." Now, imagine the looks I'd get from people who already had heard her version of things. My friends would just stare at me like I was this jerk abandoning a child, and Melissa would act hurt, like she couldn't understand why I was being so cold. I'd just leave or say something short to shut it down, but it was getting exhausting. The woman had zero shame and was absolutely determined to make me feel guilty. After the first couple of times, I had enough and went to my lawyer again. I told him about her showing up everywhere, sending messages, telling everyone that Lucy was mine. He suggested I try for a restraining order, even though it was a long shot. So, we filed, and eventually, I got a temporary restraining order against her. The catch was that in my state, even a permanent restraining order only lasts 2 years unless there's a violent crime involved, which obviously didn't apply. But I thought, fine, at least I'd have a couple of years of peace. Except I didn't. 2 years flew by, and the day the order expired, Melissa was right back at it, sending messages, showing up, trying to get my attention. I had to go back to court and renew it. This became a thing every 2 years, like clockwork. And every time, she'd be back the moment it lapsed, claiming Lucy missed her dad or that she was struggling as a single mom and needed help. There were even times she'd show up at my place with Lucy, trying to get inside. She'd go on and on about how it's not healthy for Lucy to not know her father, and then she'd get upset if I refused to let her in. I'd have to walk her out, sometimes with neighbors watching, and I could practically feel the gossip spreading. All I wanted was some distance from this mess, but every time I thought things were calming down, she'd find a way to get back in. One of the worst times, though, was during a work event. I was at a work dinner, talking to colleagues, when Melissa showed up with Lucy in tow, acting like it was a family reunion. My boss was there, people I worked with, all looking at me like I had this secret life I'd been hiding. She pulled me aside and started in about how Lucy deserved to know her father. I told her straight up, in front of my boss, "Get a paternity test, Melissa, and then we'll talk." But she just turned on the waterworks, making a scene and practically begging me to just give Lucy a chance. After that, I had to spend weeks clearing things up with my boss, explaining that no, I wasn't secretly the father, and yes, I was dealing with some crazy stuff. It was embarrassing, to say the least, and it made things at work uncomfortable for a while. Eventually, my lawyer suggested we file again for a more permanent restraining order, even though the court order could only last 2 years each time. He said if we could prove this pattern, it might make it harder for her to get around it. So, we went through the whole process again, laying out every incident, every message, every time she'd shown up unannounced. The judge approved it, but of course, I knew it'd be the same deal, 2 years of quiet, if I was lucky. But 2 years would pass, and the moment the order lapsed, I'd start getting the messages again. Melissa just couldn't help herself. And it wasn't just me she was bugging. I'd hear from mutual friends or old coworkers that she was still talking about Lucy's dad abandoning her. She was relentless. One friend even called me up, saying, "Hey, man, maybe you should just do what she wants. I mean, you don't know, maybe Lucy really is yours." It was like no one cared what I had to say, like Melissa's sob story was the only version that mattered. At one point, I just stopped trying to explain myself. I figured people were going to believe whatever they wanted to believe, and I couldn't control that. But it was exhausting dealing with all the judgment, the assumptions, people treating me like I was this deadbeat who didn't care about his kid. And Melissa knew exactly how to push buttons. Every couple of months, she'd send a picture of Lucy, always a posed one, with some sad caption like, "Lucy misses her daddy." I didn't even respond, I just deleted them and moved on. But she knew what she was doing. She'd drop those photos, wait a few weeks, then show up somewhere she knew I'd be, like she was testing how much it would take to make me crack. After a while, it felt like she was less interested in the actual support and more about dragging me back into her life. It's like she got some kind of kick out of having me stuck in this endless loop with her. No matter what I said, no matter how many restraining orders I got, Melissa kept coming back, trying to make me play along in this little game of hers. At one point, I even considered moving. I thought maybe if I was farther away, she'd finally back off. But then I realized that wouldn't solve anything, and I shouldn't have to run from my own life. So, I stayed, put up with the looks, the messages, the drama, hoping that one day she'd get bored and move on. But Melissa wasn't getting bored. She'd only dig her claws in deeper, finding new ways to make sure I didn't forget about her or Lucy. And every time I thought it was over, every time I thought maybe I'd finally be free of her, she'd show up again with some new story, some new demand, and always that same claim: Lucy deserves to know her dad. Looking back, I should have known this was never going to end easily. After years of Melissa's surprise visits and nonstop demands, I was used to her showing up out of nowhere. But I had no idea things were about to get even weirder. So, one day, I'm talking to this old friend, Ben. We hadn't caught up in a while, so we're just shooting the breeze, and somehow Melissa's name comes up. Ben's one of the few people who always believed my side of the story, so I mentioned how she'd been popping back into my life every time that restraining order expired, still pushing the "Lucy is your daughter" line without ever agreeing to a paternity test. Out of nowhere, Ben goes, "Oh, man, you wouldn't believe it, but I think she tried the same thing with a guy I know. He was dating her for a bit, and she told him he might be the father too." I'm stunned. At first, I thought he was joking, but Ben's serious. He starts explaining how his friend Dave dated Melissa briefly, and when he broke things off, she showed up a few weeks later, saying she was pregnant and hinting he could be the dad. I'm sitting there, trying to wrap my head around this. All these years, I thought I was the only one Melissa was targeting, but now I'm starting to wonder if she's been pulling this on other guys too, using Lucy to milk support out of anyone she could. The idea felt so ridiculous and yet so possible. So, I asked Ben if he could introduce me to Dave. Ben's all for it, so he calls him up, explains the situation, and within an hour, I'm talking to this guy who's had nearly the exact same experience. Dave tells me Melissa had pulled the whole "I'm pregnant, and you might be the father" thing on him, but he demanded a paternity test right away, which, of course, she refused. Unlike me, he'd put his foot down immediately and cut her off before things got messy. At this point, my head's spinning. I'm wondering how many guys she's done this to. Dave is as curious as I am, so we start digging, reaching out to people we knew had been connected to her, mutual friends, old coworkers, anyone who might know more. The more we dig, the more stories we uncover. And it turns out, Melissa's been busy. We end up finding out about 2 more guys who went through similar situations. One of them, a guy named Steve, had even been helping her out financially for a while, thinking he was doing the right thing. She'd convinced him that if he really cared, he'd give her some money to help with Lucy. He told me that she never asked for a ton, just a couple $100 here and there, which he'd given her a few times to avoid feeling like a jerk. But every time he'd ask for a paternity test, she'd get all defensive, saying it was insulting and she couldn't believe he'd question her. Now I'm sitting there with Ben, Dave, and Steve, just completely dumbfounded. For years, I'd thought Melissa's obsession with me was just her being vindictive, but it turns out she was running this scheme on a whole lineup of guys, using Lucy as a way to cash in from anyone who'd bite. The craziest part? These guys had all just moved on, like they'd written it off as some random bad experience. None of them had really pushed back or looked deeper into what she was doing, probably because she was smart enough to keep things low-key, asking for small amounts and making it seem like she was the victim. She played her part so well that no one thought to compare notes. And that's exactly how she got away with it for so long. At this point, I felt like I was in the middle of some bizarre mystery that was just now coming to light. We start piecing together a timeline, trying to figure out when she'd been with each of us and when she'd started using Lucy as a pawn. It was like this twisted puzzle, with each of us holding a piece that only made sense when we put it all together. I decided it was time to take this to my lawyer and see what we could actually do about it. I couldn't let her keep pulling this on me or any of the other guys. So, we all agreed to go in together as a group. My lawyer was blown away when I explained the whole situation. He hadn't seen anything like it before, but he said that if we all worked together, we could make a strong case against her and finally get some closure on this whole thing. After we filed, Melissa was ordered to appear in court, and that's when things got even messier. She tried denying everything, acting like we were all just a bunch of bitter exes trying to gang up on her. But with so many of us telling the same story, she didn't stand a chance. My lawyer pointed out how she'd refused a paternity test from every single one of us, how she'd taken money from Steve under false pretenses, and how her story changed depending on who she was talking to. She started to unravel pretty quickly under the pressure. The judge eventually ordered her to get a paternity test for Lucy, and you could see Melissa's face go pale. For the first time, she was losing control of her little game, and she knew it. She tried arguing with the judge, saying the test was unnecessary and insulting, but the judge wasn't having any of it. We all took our tests, and at this point, I was finally starting to feel like maybe this nightmare was coming to an end. The judge set a date for the results, and I remember walking out of the courtroom that day with a weird mix of relief and anger. I was mad, sure, but there was this strange sense of satisfaction knowing that maybe this was finally it, the end of Melissa's endless demands and guilt trips. What blew my mind, though, was how close she'd come to getting away with it. If it wasn't for that one random conversation with Ben, none of us would have ever known there were other guys going through the exact same thing. She could have kept this up for who knows how long, dragging other men into her chaos, squeezing money out of them with this fake story of Lucy's dad. It's like she'd perfected this routine, knowing just how to push people's buttons without pushing too far. The worst part was, I couldn't help but think about Lucy. Here was this kid being used as a tool by her own mom, with no idea of who her real dad even was or if he'd ever been around. It was sad, honestly, and I realized that if Melissa was capable of doing this to us, what else was she putting that kid through? But that wasn't my problem to solve. All I wanted was for Melissa to leave me and everyone else alone, to end her game for good. And finally, it felt like that might actually happen. The day finally came for us to face Melissa in court, and let me tell you, it felt surreal. After years of her games, her guilt trips, and her lies, here we were, all lined up in the same room. The other guys and I had spent months preparing, comparing notes, working with our lawyers. But as I sat there, waiting for the hearing to start, it hit me how wild this whole situation really was. A bunch of us, practically strangers, bonded by one woman's never-ending scam. It was like a bad movie, only we were living it. When Melissa walked in, she was all smiles, trying to act like this was some big misunderstanding. She even gave a little wave to one of the guys she'd been hounding, as if she was walking into a coffee shop to catch up with friends. Unbelievable. But that's Melissa for you, always playing to her audience, always acting like she's the victim who doesn't understand why everyone's ganging up on her. Then the hearing starts, and she immediately tries to twist things, making herself look like she was just a struggling single mom who was only trying to make ends meet. She goes on about how she just wanted what was best for her daughter, talking like she's some kind of martyr. I'm sitting there, grinding my teeth, while she tells this sob story. But the judge was not buying it. You could see the skepticism all over his face. My lawyer laid everything out, starting with my story. He went through how Melissa had initially claimed I was the father, how she'd refused a paternity test from the start, and how she'd used the Lucy needs her dad line to guilt me into contact time after time. He brought up every message, every unwanted appearance, every single time she dragged me into her mess, only to disappear whenever I asked for proof. It was brutal hearing it all laid out like that, years of my life summed up in this sad, twisted timeline. Then he moved on to the others. Dave, Steve, and the rest of the guys took turns telling their versions of the same story. Each one had almost the exact same experience. Melissa showing up, saying she was pregnant, insisting they were the father, and refusing any kind of paternity test while squeezing them for support. It was like watching a broken record, same lies, same manipulations, just with different names and faces. Melissa's lawyer tried to defend her, saying we couldn't prove she'd done anything wrong. He claimed she'd just been misunderstood and that we were exaggerating things. But when the judge looked back over all our statements and saw how similar they were, even he had a hard time keeping a straight face. It was clear Melissa's lawyer was grasping at straws, trying to turn this mess into something innocent. But with so many of us standing there, all telling the same story, they didn't stand a chance. Then the judge turned to Melissa, and he was done playing nice. He asked her directly why she'd refused every paternity test, why she kept insisting that Lucy was each of our kids when she wouldn't prove it. Melissa's face went red, and she started stammering, saying that she felt it was insulting and that a mother's word should be enough. She tried to throw some guilt in there, talking about how hard it is for single mothers and how she was just trying to protect Lucy. The judge looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Miss Clark, you've been asked by multiple men, multiple times, to provide proof of paternity, and you've refused every single time. I have to question the sincerity of your claims." For the first time, Melissa looked shaken. She opened her mouth like she was going to argue, but nothing came out. Finally, she muttered something about how she didn't think it was necessary. That's when my lawyer spoke up again. He pointed out how she'd accepted money from Steve for years, knowing full well he might not even be the father. He explained how she'd manipulated people, how she'd kept Lucy from any real connection to her true family just to keep this charade going. You could see Melissa shrinking under every word, her confident smile gone, replaced with this trapped look, like she finally understood she was caught. Then the judge ordered a paternity test right there. Melissa tried to argue again, saying it was still insulting and humiliating to go through with it. She even turned to the judge with tears in her eyes, saying, "I just don't understand why they're doing this to me." But the judge was done with her. He told her the test wasn't just for our peace of mind but for Lucy's, so she could finally know who her father really was. Melissa went silent after that, and you could see she knew she'd lost. I remember sitting there, watching her, and feeling this mix of relief and disgust. She'd tried so hard to make us look like the bad guys, tried to turn her lies into a pity story. But now, with nowhere left to hide, she was just a person caught in her own web of lies. As we were all getting ready to leave, Melissa looked around the room, avoiding eye contact with each of us. She didn't say a word, didn't even try to explain herself. I think she knew that at this point, no one was buying it anymore. For the first time in years, it felt like maybe, just maybe, we were finally seeing the end of all this. Leaving the courthouse that day was like walking out of a heavy fog. For so long, I'd been wrapped up in her drama, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering when she'd pop up next with some new claim or story. But now, I was done. All of us were. We were finally getting our answers, and for once, Melissa wasn't in control of the narrative. I walked out with the other guys, and we all looked at each other, this weird mix of relief and exhaustion in our faces. I don't think any of us really knew what to say. There wasn't much left to say, honestly. We'd all been through hell, and finally, we were about to get the truth we deserved. It was like we'd all been pulled together by this insane experience, and now, as we left, it felt like we were each finally walking away from it for good. All that was left now was the paternity test, and finally, we'd know. No more guessing, no more lies, no more guilt. Just the truth, plain and simple. And honestly, that was all any of us had ever wanted. After all the years, all the drama, all the wild accusations and surprise appearances, the paternity test results finally came in. I'll admit, waiting for that final answer wasn't easy. Even though I'd been sure all along that Lucy wasn't mine, there was still that tiny sliver of doubt gnawing at me. I mean, what if Melissa had been right this whole time? But deep down, I was pretty confident I'd been played. The day the results came in, I was at work. My lawyer called, telling me he had the results in hand and that it was a clear answer, no maybes or probabilities. My heart was pounding as I stepped into the hallway, and my coworkers probably thought I was losing it, pacing around the building like that. So, finally, I asked him straight up, "Am I the father or not?" And just like that, he confirmed what I'd known all along. I wasn't Lucy's father. I can't even describe the relief that washed over me. It felt like this huge weight had been lifted, like I'd been carrying around this invisible anchor for years. I could finally walk away from all the madness, knowing I'd done everything I could to set the record straight. I mean, sure, there was anger there too, anger at Melissa for all the years she wasted, for dragging my name through the mud, for making me jump through every hoop she could find just to avoid the truth. But mostly, I just felt done. After I got off the phone with my lawyer, I sent a quick text to the other guys, letting them know the results were in and we'd all been in the clear. Pretty soon, we were all on this group call, celebrating in the strangest way possible. There wasn't much cheering or high-fiving. It was more like this quiet, mutual understanding that we'd survived something really messed up, and we could finally move on. Everyone had the same reaction, relief mixed with disbelief. It was like we'd been to battle and walked out the other side. But it wasn't over for Melissa, apparently. As soon as she got the news, she completely lost it. She showed up at my house the very next day, screaming on my front lawn like she'd just been betrayed by the whole world. She was yelling all kinds of nonsense, saying I was a coward, that I'd turned Lucy against her, that I'd ruined her life. The whole neighborhood could hear her, and I didn't even try to engage. I just stood at the window and watched her make a scene, knowing there wasn't anything left for her to use against me. Eventually, the cops showed up and took her away. She'd violated the restraining order again, so this time, she actually got arrested. Part of me felt bad for Lucy. She'd grown up with this mother who was so obsessed with keeping up her story that she'd never let her know the truth. I couldn't imagine what that did to her, to be raised in that kind of environment. But then, something I didn't expect happened. Lucy's great-grandmother, Rose, reached out through my lawyer. She sent an apology, saying she'd had no idea Melissa was lying to so many people, that she was truly sorry for all the trouble Melissa had caused. Rose had apparently been the one supporting Melissa financially for most of Lucy's life, thinking she was just helping out her struggling granddaughter. Now that she knew the truth, she'd cut off all support, and Lucy was now living with her full time. I didn't know much about Rose, but I knew this was probably the best thing that could have happened for Lucy. Along with the apology, Rose offered to let me read a letter from Lucy, who was understandably confused and shaken. The letter started with, "To the man I thought was my dad." That alone was a punch to the gut. She went on to explain how her mom had always told her that her dad would love her if he ever met her, but that I was too busy to care about her. Lucy wrote about how her whole life had been this story, this idea that I was her dad and I didn't want her. She said she used to ask Melissa why I didn't visit, why I didn't show up, and every time, Melissa would tell her I didn't want to be a family. The more I read, the more I felt a strange mix of guilt and anger. I had no idea Lucy was dealing with all of this. She was just a kid caught in the middle of a lie she didn't ask for. I wish there was some way I could fix things for her, but at the end of the day, that wasn't my place. In the letter, Lucy apologized for the way things had turned out, and she even said she hoped I'd forgive her for everything. That hit me hard. Here was this kid apologizing to me for a situation that wasn't her fault at all. It was clear she'd been fed lies her whole life, and I felt terrible that she'd been dragged through this. But I couldn't exactly step in either. This was Melissa's mess to clean up, and I hoped Rose would get Lucy the help she needed to process everything. The fallout was pretty intense, especially for Melissa. With her own family turning against her and Rose cutting off her funds, I don't think she has much of a support system left. Part of me feels sorry for her, but mostly, I'm just glad she can't keep pulling people into her twisted games. She's finally facing the consequences of years of lies, and hopefully, she'll think twice before trying to manipulate anyone else. As for me, I can honestly say I'm at peace with it. This whole thing was a nightmare, sure, but at least now I know the truth. I can move on without second-guessing myself, without wondering if maybe, just maybe, I'd been wrong all those years. And for the first time in over a decade, I feel like I'm actually free from all of it. The whole experience taught me a lot about people, about trust, and about how far someone will go to protect their own story. And yeah, it left me with some scars, but it also gave me a weird sort of closure. I know I'm not Lucy's dad, and as much as I feel for her, I know I did everything I could to handle this the right way. I guess sometimes that's the best you can hope for. And now, I'm done. Done with Melissa, done with the court battles, done with the drama. I'm moving forward, and I'm never looking back. Alright, folks, so I thought I'd finally wrap this whole story up, but sometimes life's got one more twist up its sleeve. After all the court battles, the paternity test, and the mess with Melissa, I thought that was the end of it. But then, about a month ago, I got an unexpected message from Lucy herself. She wanted to talk, but this time, it wasn't about me or the years of lies her mom had put us all through. She told me she'd been thinking a lot, and now that she knew the truth, she wanted to try and find her real dad. And strangely enough, she was hoping I could help her out. At first, I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me thought it might just open up more drama, especially since Melissa had a way of popping up whenever I least expected it. But Lucy was different. She was sincere, and I could tell she just wanted answers. So, after a bit of back and forth, I agreed. I figured if I could help her avoid going through the same mess I'd been through, it'd be worth it. The search started small. Lucy had a few things from her mom's old stuff, some photos, a few old letters, things that she thought might give us some clues. We combed through everything together, comparing timelines and people Melissa had dated around the time she was pregnant. Honestly, it felt surreal. Here I was, helping her uncover the life her mom had kept hidden from her, and all the while, I was learning more about her too. There was one photo in particular that caught our attention. It was of Melissa with a guy we'd never heard her mention, a faded Polaroid with a young, smiling guy standing next to her. No date, no name on the back, just the two of them at some random beach. But something about the photo struck us both as significant. Lucy remembered her mom mentioning a boyfriend she'd had right before she met me, someone her mom had never talked about again after they split. We didn't have much to go on, but it was a start. With a bit of internet detective work, we finally tracked him down. His name was Alex, and we found his profile on an old social media page he barely updated. Lucy took a deep breath and messaged him. I could tell she was both excited and terrified. This was the guy who might actually be her dad, the person she'd been wondering about her whole life. The wait was nerve-wracking, and I could see Lucy trying to keep her hopes in check. A couple of days later, Alex responded. He was shocked, to say the least, but he agreed to meet up and hear Lucy out. She asked if I could come along for support, which, again, I didn't expect. I wasn't her dad, and I didn't really know where I fit in all this, but I could see she felt more comfortable with me there, so I went. When we met Alex, he was a bit older, obviously, but he had this friendly, open demeanor that immediately put Lucy at ease. He listened as she explained everything, how she'd grown up, the lies she'd been told, the recent court case. You could tell he was taken aback, especially hearing about Melissa's years of manipulation. But there was something in his face that told me he was ready to make up for lost time if it turned out Lucy was his daughter. After that initial meeting, Alex agreed to a DNA test, and let me tell you, waiting for those results was a whole other level of tension. Lucy tried to keep herself busy, but every time we talked, I could see that anxious look in her eyes, like she was bracing herself for another disappointment. Finally, the results came in. Alex was her father. I'll never forget the look on Lucy's face when she found out. It was this mix of relief, happiness, and disbelief all rolled into one. She had the answers she'd been searching for, and for the first time, she actually had a sense of family that didn't come with strings attached. Alex looked as overwhelmed as she did, but he took her hand and told her he was there for her, ready to make up for the years they missed. Since then, Lucy's been getting to know Alex, slowly but surely. She told me he's been doing everything he can to make her feel welcome in his life, and they've even started planning some time together to catch up. I won't lie, it feels strange being on the outside of it, knowing I helped her find her real dad but not really being a part of her life anymore. But seeing her find peace and finally move forward, that's worth it. As for Melissa, word got back to her about the test, and from what I've heard, she's not handling it well. She's been making all kinds of claims, that the test was rigged or that Lucy's been brainwashed by me and Alex. But at this point, no one's listening. Even her own family is finally shutting her down. It's like everyone's finally realized just how deep her lies go, and they're done putting up with it. And me? I'm honestly at peace with it. I thought this whole thing would end with me just walking away, but it feels better knowing Lucy got what she needed. Helping her find her dad was the right thing to do, and while our paths might not cross much anymore, I know she's going to be okay. She's with her real family now, and she's free of all the lies that weighed her down for so long.